Now, if you're on any kind of social media, you've heard the dreadful news. The new Grinch movie is trash. At least that's what I've been hearing everywhere. People my age are just saying, it's awful. It has none of the punch, none of the power, none of the emotion that the Jim Carrey version has. And that made me pretty sad. But then, lo and behold, I heard from 3 people that the Grinch movie, the new one with Benedict Cumberbatch, actually wasn't that bad. In fact, was really good. So, what's the difference here? Why are some people saying it's great and some people are telling me it's awful? Well, I have seen it now in theaters, and I think I can answer that question. Before we go any further, I need to say that I am going to refer to the Jim Carrey version of the Grinch just as the Carrey Grinch. But for the Benedict Cumberbatch version of the Grinch, I am not going to say Benedict Cumberbatch Grinch over and over again because I refuse. I'm not even going to say Benedict Grinch over and over again because that's going to give me a headache. So since Benedict and I are really good friends, not really, I'm going to call him the Benny Grinch. So, the first thing you have to understand about these 2 Grinch movies is that they are set in totally, completely different worlds. Even though it's still the place of Whoville and it's still the same mountain and it's still in winter, it's technically in the same place, the worlds are totally, totally different. So if you want to think back to some of your high school English classes or anything like that, you may remember talking about tone in literature. And I'm an English minor, so we talk about this kind of thing a lot. So when you think about the tone of literature, think about what kind of world a story is set in. If a world is set somewhere that's really, really happy, like all the time, you might say that that's kind of set in like a summery type world. And that doesn't mean that it's actually summer there, it just means that the world is summer-like. And if you're looking at a world that is sad and kind of cynical and ironic and all those kinds of things, then that would probably be more of a wintry world. You usually see more summery worlds in children's literature or children's movies. So like, think about Trolls, think about the Tinkerbell movies, like those are all set in happy worlds. While more cynical, kind of sad worlds are usually found in things for adults, like, Les Mis or Oliver Twist or something like that. The thing about stories like Les Mis and Oliver Twist is that even though they're in a sad world, there's like kind of a cruel humor and irony about them. If you know anything about those stories, for example, Les Mis, you can think about the Thénardiers and like the kind of humor that's brought out in these terrible circumstances. So what does this have to do with the Grinch movies? Well, I'll tell you. These 2 Grinch movies are set in totally different seasons. Even though they're both technically set in winter, I mean literally, but the new Benny Grinch is set in a summery world because, wait for it, it's geared for children. And the Jim Carrey version is set in a more wintry, cynical world because it is technically geared for an older audience. So when considering the Carrey Grinch, think about this. The world that we're introduced to is one that's kind of terrible. I mean, it's the world of the Who's, and it's supposed to be kind of happy, but all of the Who's are kind of the worst. They're introduced to us as bullies. They're introduced to us as these greedy, people that only care about presents and being the best and their house being prettier than the next house. I mean, we're literally introduced to the Who's on a Black Friday type day. I mean, that's people at their worst. That kind of sets the tone for this whole movie, that it's going to be kind of a cynical one. The only bright light among these Who's is Cindy Lou, who is sitting here questioning, is Christmas really about all this stuff? And about all of this never-ending just greed? Is Christmas not about something more than that? And so we see that Cindy Lou and we think, finally, a rational mind here. But she's the only one. And as it goes on, it just keeps getting worse. We see how terrible the mayor is. We see how the Grinch was treated when he was young. Like, all these kinds of things. And we'll get back into that later. But we are just presented with a terrible, cynical world of the Who's. Compare this with the Benny Grinch version. When the Benny Grinch version is introduced, the first thing we see is a happy, thriving town full of really, really sweet Who's. I mean, you see them all playing and being neighborly and being kind to one another and like just having fun. And this is never refuted as this movie goes on. This idea that these Who's are sweet and good is constantly reiterated as we meet more Who's that are really sweet. And it just keeps going. Like, these guys are great. They're absolutely wonderful. And Cindy Lou isn't necessarily a bright light here. In darkness, that is. She's kind of a bright light among a bunch of other bright lights. This is a world that we would probably want to live in. While the Carrie version, no one in their right mind would want to live with those Who's. So the first big difference is the world that these movies are set in. But the second big difference is the Grinches themselves. I'm actually going to start with the Benny Grinch. So a lot of people have been accusing this Grinch of not even being mean or nasty in any way. And that's not necessarily true, but there definitely is some validity in that statement. The worst thing that Benny Grinch does is just a few pretty harmless pranks. I mean, he hits a kid in the face with a snowball. That could have hurt, I guess. And then he slurped a pickle and put it in someone's jar. Yeah. Basically stuff that you would expect a child to do if he was acting out. Now think about the Benny Grinch in contrast to the world that he's set in. It's a happy, happy, happy world. So we don't really understand why this Grinch is sad or grumpy in any way. He really has no reason to be. Whereas the Carrie Grinch, if I'm being honest, isn't that much more formidable than the Benny Grinch. But at least the Carrie Grinch is a little bit more aggressive. The thing about the Carrie Grinch is that he is cynical. And this makes sense to us because the Who's are the worst. So we would probably be feeling the same way as this Grinch if we lived in this world. So the fact that he's cynical about the world that he lives in makes sense. And we kind of sympathize with that Grinch a lot more because we understand where he's coming from. Oh, do we like the Carrie Grinch because he's more relatable? Well, just hang on a second. Another big thing I think we need to look at with the Grinches is their childhood experiences. So the screenwriters decided to give both Grinches a sad backstory, which is interesting because there's not a trace of that in the book, but that's fine. That's what they chose to do, so it's all good. The Benny Grinch's childhood is sad. So what we see is a tiny little Grinch in an orphanage, which is very different than the Carrie Grinch. The Benny Grinch is in an orphanage all by himself, surrounded by a happy world that he doesn't feel like he can get involved in. And I think the big sin here of the Who's is that nobody chose to reach out to him. And yes, that's sad. And yes, that is the fault of the Who's. But this Grinch could have, and please don't think I'm blaming the victim or anything like that. I'm just saying this little tiny Grinch could have reached out to someone, and we get the idea that maybe, just maybe, these Who's are the kind of people that would have welcomed him with open arms. And this gets to the big issue with the Benny Grinch. His issue is loneliness. That's his problem. The Carrie Grinch, when he was little, his big thing was in school. He was relentlessly bullied, right, by the other kids. And he finally decides to do something happy and to do something nice and to make an ornament for his love. You know, I think it was Martha Mayhew. He makes her this beautiful tree topper for her tree, and he's really excited about it. And then he comes to class and tries to present it to her, and everyone is terrible to him. Especially the Grinch's teacher. I will talk forever about how terrible the Grinch's teacher is. Just kidding. Just kidding. I'll have self-control, and I will not rant about the Grinch teacher. Not today. If a child has a bag over his head, there's obviously something wrong, so take him out in the hallway and ask him what's going on. Sorry. I'm good. And then she laughs at him in front of all the other kids! So while the problem of Benny's Who's is kind of neglect and neglecting to reach out to the Grinch, the Carrie's Grinch problem is that the Who's are terrible to him and they're bullying him. They're not ignoring him, they're actively bullying him. And that makes him feel cynical about the Christmas season and makes him feel like, there's nothing really cheery, nothing good about this because everyone's the worst. So he goes and lives off on his own. This is important. The Carrie Grinch had family that he could have gone back to, but the Carrie Grinch made an active choice to leave, while the Benny Grinch didn't feel like he had a choice but to leave because he really felt like nobody would reach out to him. He didn't feel like he had a home. He was in an orphanage. So his living by himself is not really choice in his own mind. He feels like he doesn't have a choice. So if the problem of the Benny Grinch was loneliness, the problem of the Carrie Grinch is his cynicism. The Carrie Grinch hates the Who's. He hates Christmas because he hates the Who's. Because they're the worst, and we can understand that. Now think about these issues. Loneliness versus being cynical about people and about the holiday and all these kinds of things. What kind of audience groups do these sound like they're gearing towards again? Oh yeah, an older audience and children. There are exceptions, but for the most part, the kind of thing that the Benny Grinch struggles with is what kids are going to struggle with. That idea of loneliness, because loneliness is scary. If a child doesn't feel like they have a family to go to, or feels like their family just doesn't treat them well or doesn't love them, they're going to feel that deep seed of loneliness, just like the Benny Grinch does. And while some teenagers and, young adults and people like that also struggle with loneliness, a lot of times what we kind of struggle with more is just believing that the world is kind of the worst. In college, we get to take classes like philosophy and ethics, and we get to study some of the terrible things about the world. And it's really easy to get into a rut like, well, the world's not any good and I don't have any purpose in it, and so what's the point? This is a very young adult problem to have, which is why the Carrie Grinch appeals to us so much more. Because I think almost anyone can agree, when you watch the Jim Carrey version of the Grinch, almost every sentence out of that man's mouth is relatable. Am I just eating because I'm bored? What should I wear? Should I go or not? Well, I'll go, but I'll be fashionably late. Yes, no, wait, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't make any actual decisions. Y'all, that's literally a college student. Like, if you're in high school and you're wondering what college is like, just watch the Jim Carrey version of the Grinch. That's how you feel every single day of your life. Does this make the Carrey version better? Not necessarily, because kids aren't going to feel like they relate with the Carrie Grinch. But if they're watching the Benny Grinch, who is reacting to all of his issues like a child would, they're going to feel a relationship with the Benny Grinch that maybe when we're older, we just don't feel anymore. So one Grinch movie is better than the other because it's relatable. Which one? Kind of depends on who you are. Now, I know someone who is my age that I went to the Benny Grinch movie with, and she actually said she liked the Benny Grinch version better. Why is that? Well, maybe she has more of a childlike personality, and there is nothing wrong with that. Maybe she feels more sympathy with the Benny Grinch than she does with the Carrie Grinch, and that is totally understandable. There will also be some kids who, are the kind of kids that like, a series of unfortunate events. There are going to be some kids like that are going to feel more of a connection with the Carrie Grinch, and that's okay too. Both movies have good things and bad things. Both of them have an adorable Cindy Lou for totally different reasons. Both of them have likable characters, and both of them have a likable Grinch. I personally think the Carrie version is a little bit superior, and really the only reason I believe that is because the big moment where his heart grows, I think the Carrie version just did that moment so much better, and I can do a totally separate video about that if y'all want. But don't disregard the Benny version. It's actually really cute. It's a good movie. But you can't go in expecting it to be the same as the Carrie version, and you can't go in expecting it to be geared towards you as an older viewer. If you go see the Benny Grinch with a sense of childlike wonder, you know, the same kind of wonder that you watch the old Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory with, then honestly, I don't think you'll be disappointed. It's really cute, and there are a lot of things that makes it really good. And like I said, I can make a totally other video about that, but the point is, both of them are really good, just kind of depending on who you are and the attitude that you watch it with. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.